Okay. One of the key themes that seems to have come through all the presentations is how do you get the buy-in of a board, and is reporting an answer to that? Is it an impediment? And how can it be used to get that buy-in from the very top? And our next speaker is going to explore some of those issues. And Lynette Thornsten comes from actually, I think, a very interesting background, and probably a background that's symbolic of the changing nature of Australian business. I would have said 10 years ago, someone who held a position as CEO of Greenpeace probably wouldn't have been working for major corporates. But as someone who's had a position of CEO of Greenpeace Australia and Director of the Greenpeace International Climate Change Campaign, Lynette has now moved to a position of Head of Community and Environment for IAG Australia, which is the largest insurance company in Australia. So certainly a very varied background, and one which is going to give great context to discuss how we build a business case for corporate social responsibility, how we garner the support of the board and other key stakeholders along the way. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lynette Thornsten, who will just speak for the next 35 minutes. Thanks, Len.
Hello, thank you very much. Now, I just have to ask a little question. Is Gary Johns from the Institute of Public Affairs in the room? God damn. Because I'm probably going to be a little rude about Gary later. Some of you may know that the placing of my talk and the program for this very summit was very strongly attacked by Gary Johns, who's a former Keating minister, I think. And he had very strong views about me being here at all, let alone working for IAG, let alone speaking to you. So I'm going to answer some of that critique as part of my presentation, but I did want to know if he was here. I also want to know a little bit about you, so I get a sense of who I'm speaking to. So just brief show of hands, if you wouldn't mind. How many of you are corporate social responsibility practitioners in business? So, yeah, quite a few. How many of you are from government? Very few, but good to have you here. And what about the non-government sector? Most of you, or about half of you. Okay, well that's interesting, because that will have a bit of a bearing on what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a little bit tedious to begin with. Bear with me. I will give you a bit of context about Insurance Australia Group, and then hopefully I'll get into some things that are a little more meaty. Okay, so just briefly who we are. We are Australia's largest general insurer. We're now in the process of acquiring substantial interests offshore, which raises with it a whole host of ethical and global corporate social responsibility concerns. But we cover more than 19 million risks. We insure over $800 billion worth of assets. You get a sense of our premium revenue. Our net profit has been continuously rising since Mike Hawker took over following the demutualisation of the NRMA. NRMA Insurance is our largest single company. And very, very important to the take-up and reality, I suppose, and truth of our corporate social responsibility position, our employees. And we employ around about 11,500 people at the moment. I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about... I hesitate to use the word journey. I don't know if any of you saw a wonderful opinion piece about the overuse of the word journey by corporates, and it basically said a rise in interest rates is not a journey. It's one of those words that gets used terribly, and I've been trying to search for another one story, but a little bit of history about how sustainability has taken hold in Insurance Australia Group. When Mike Hawker took over in 2001, not long after that, he approached Sam Mostyn, who may be known to some of you, who is my boss. She is the head of culture and reputation at Insurance Australia Group. This was the climate that was prevailing at the time. A huge number of corporate governance scandals, both overseas and indeed in Australia. And the one that perhaps most directly affected our industry, obviously, was HIH. And indeed, some of the better people, very bruised and quite damaged by their experience of the HIH collapse. But nevertheless, quite a large number of their better operators, in fact, have come over to IAG and have some extremely interesting stories to tell about that time. Not the least, I think, about early warning signals of things going wrong, and yet why within that culture people felt unable to speak out. But certainly one of the early warning signals for me, which I thought was fascinating, was some of the senior women who've come over to us telling us that Ray Anderson didn't allow women to wear pants, which I just thought was absolutely staggering. I don't know if you know that, but that to me says something about the internal culture. You know, in the late 90s, 2000s, women were not permitted to wear pants to work. I just thought it was extraordinary. What Mike Hawker said to Sam when he recruited her was, how would you feel about working for an organisation whose culture eventually becomes so strong it becomes its reputation, so that there's a healthy cyclic relationship. In other words, this is a very long way from CSR therefore becoming a kind of PR add-on. If everything you do in the name of sustainability of your company is in fact driven first and foremost by how your people feel about what you do for your work on an everyday basis. And this, I guess, is at the heart of our thinking and the way we describe our approach to sustainability. The other thing that took a long time, there was a lot of discussion as IAG moved into sustainability. A great number of employee forums were held to really try and work out what we meant by who we are. Now, vision statements and mission statements and those kind of things in corporations often get scoffed at. But I think unless you absolutely understand deeply your core purpose, your reason for being, then everything else must derive from your purpose. And if everything doesn't derive from your purpose, particularly in an area like corporate social responsibility, you are very much at risk of being the first thing to go in a budget cut. If you're not delivering value as it relates to the fundamentals of your core purpose, then you can be very sure that you will have a probably pretty robust and scary conversation with your CFO. Who will fail to see the business value that you bring to the company. So our core purpose, not surprisingly, for an insurer is paying claims, understanding and pricing risk, managing costs and reducing risk. Now, the piece around reducing risk I'll probably talk to at most length, and it's most obvious that the sorts of things we can do in partnership in society, like helping to reduce crime in well-known crime hotspots, so in other words, seeing the rates of household break and enters go down, seeing the rates of stolen cars go down, working in progressive partnerships with non-government organisations, local government and state government to try and keep troubled kids in school has an absolutely material business benefit to us. And this is the way we look at every single thing we do that relates to sustainability. But we try and make that work for the whole four planks of the purpose. So it's not just the reducing risk piece, which would seem the most obvious. Managing costs actually is damn obvious when it comes to things like reducing CO2 emissions. Obviously, if you're getting your electricity bills down, you're managing your costs. But then also in the more complex areas of understanding and pricing risk, helping our senior management to have a very complex view of understanding broad notions of risk in society, not just as it might pertain to your the very busy world. And I worry deeply about workaholism in corporations. Because one of the material risks of workaholism in corporations is that senior management directors can fail to read the world around them. And of course, paying claims, which fundamentally in terms is about how we engage with our customers. And if we engage poorly with our customers, we won't be a sustainable business. I like this quote about reputation, and I'll just whip through it. The most significant trend for Australian business in 2005 is going to be a heightened emphasis on ethics and reputation risk. After James Hardie, NAB and all the others, there'll be lots of managers asking how exposed they are. Ironically, the biggest risk is the insularity of directors and senior managers who are constantly ambushed because they don't know enough about what's going on with ordinary people in the real world. And that's a more articulate way of making the point I just made to you. Now, this is long, but I know there's lots and lots of discussion about the word sustainability. It's used so variously. It's sometimes used just in terms of ecological sustainability. It's used in very complex ways. People have conversations that can last for 2 hours about sustainability, and you can realise at the end of the conversation that you're talking about entirely different things. I think it's important that we don't get too hung up on it. I've been in sustainability for over 15 years, and every time I meet a relative newcomer to this field, they get terribly worried about the words. And in a way, it's more about making it real for the context in which you work and operate. And let's not get too upset about it, because I've been hearing people try to solve the S-word problem for 15 years now. It's still not solved. Anyway, here is Dow Jones' very long and complex go at this, but I have my reasons for using this particular Dow Jones Sustainability Index definition. as it relates to the core business proposition that I'm putting to you. Corporate sustainability is a business approach to create long-term shareholder value by embracing opportunities and managing risks deriving from economic, environmental and social developments. Corporate sustainability leaders harness the market's potential for sustainability products and services while at the same time successfully reducing and avoiding sustainability costs and risks. A growing number of investors perceive sustainability as a catalyst for enlightened and disciplined management and thus a crucial success factor. As a result, investors are increasingly diversifying their portfolios by investing in companies that set industry-wide best practices with regard to sustainability. Again, a similar one, this is Vic Super, who were the joint winners along with us last year for Best First Time Sustainability Report. But here again, the notion that it's embedded centrally in the operations of the company. The central operating principle for Vic Super is to create value for stakeholders by embracing sustainability through the integration of economic, social and environmental considerations into all of Vic Super's decision support systems. And here's a quote from Mike, our CEO, which I very much like because it's so simple, and it's simply, for us, just the ability to run business in an indefinite way. Now, that doesn't mean business as usual. As Mike points out, that unless you're taking into account the needs of your stakeholders, unless you're respectful of the communities in which you operate, unless you are profoundly mitigating your environmental impact, unless you engage respectfully with your customers, then if you're not doing those things, then of course you can't run your business in an indefinite way. So I very much like the simplicity of that. This is a, you've got to remember I work in an industry with lots of blokes who've been working there 30 or 40 or 50 years in some cases. And sometimes I feel a bit like it's like that. So this is from a series of kind of joke images about occupational health and safety, but this is one of my favourites. And I think for those of you who are CSR practitioners in corporations, this is my way of saying solidarity, brothers and sisters, because it's not always easy. And I've had a particularly long and tumultuous journey with my Chief Financial Officer, and I can tell you that the way not to bring your Chief Financial Officer on board is to suggest to him in the very first meeting that perhaps he should be the Chief Environment Officer. In my experience, hard-earned, Chief Financial Officers like to think that things are their own ideas, so there you go. Don't tell them ever baldly what it is they should be doing. Let them think they thought of it themselves. Oh, here we are. Here's the Gary Johns piece that caused a bit of controversy a while ago. Gary Johns began his piece like this: there are corporations that just want to be loved. Philanthropy used to be the preferred vehicle, now it's corporate social responsibility. The danger of corporations involving themselves in social responsibility is that they may begin to play the role of government, either in service provision or deciding public priorities. At the very least, they are distracted from their core responsibility by messing around with community stakeholders and lose value for their real stakeholders, owners, workers and customers. Take, for example, the decision by IAG to employ Lynette Thornsten. She's a former director of Greenpeace International and General Ratback. No, he didn't say that. But he did go on to say the business of business should be business. And this is the prevailing attitude that we find, many of us daily, that we continue to challenge. And what I would say to Gary Johns is that our 11,500 employees, our almost 1 million shareholders, and our over 2.5 million customers in New South Wales alone all live in the very communities in which IAG seeks to work, operate and retain them as customers. And that is why we are interested in our stakeholders, and that is why there is an absolutely material relationship to business. And I would point out, that's a little odd for someone who is an opinion commentator and also a former politician. I mean, he undermines his own argument by saying the business of business is business, then seeks to tell business at great length how they should go about doing it, but never mind. Just a very quick history of our of sustainability. I know CSR and sustainability are words that get used interchangeably, but thinking a bit more deeply about the words and what you mean about them does mean that we've gone through a bit of a journey. So we use the terminology CSR much more frequently in 2002, 03. We began a lot of our work in climate change research, crime, road safety and so on. And then we realised that we had to put some more work into our own internal footprint and our efforts internally. So put a lot of work to bringing on Toyota Priuses as our tool of trade fleet and so on. And then started thinking about our suppliers about this time. So quite a lot of work with our suppliers. Even though we'd be the first to admit that we've made some mistakes with our smash repairers, who are key suppliers. We're in a very public dispute at the moment with smash repairers, and we acknowledge that, although we stand by the business model we're fighting about. And then finally, this much more complex and all-encompassing notion of we don't even really use the word sustainability very much anymore. We keep trying to talk about long-term sustainable business, which probably means if you take the logic of that rationale over time, it means that me and those many of you who are CSR practitioners in business will probably be out of jobs in 5 years unless we can consistently think of ways to reinvent ourselves. Or it just may be that some of the very large and complicated corporations we work for are going to take more than 5 years to become excellent managers for the long term, which is another way of thinking about this. So I've pretty much said that. I'm under pressure. I've been told to try and get this to 20 minutes so you've got time to ask me questions. These are just some examples of the sorts of partnerships we're engaged in. Youth off the streets, lots of work again, working with troubled youth, very interested in supporting them in a number of ways. Again, this is a traineeship scheme that we support with a great deal of money actually, but the point is that it's material to our business. It makes sense that we would be supporting trainees into a major supplier of ours, indeed the smash repairers. We're not fighting with all of them, by the way, just a few of them. St John, this is again interesting national partnership that we have in terms of looking at prevention, obviously, of medical concerns. We've gone a bit further with St John in that we have a very interesting business, not St John, with NRMA Careflight, and then we have a very interesting business research partnership with them of some $4 million a year in researching head injuries, and it's called the Head Injury Retrieval Trial, HURT, which means that obviously it's a fantastic value to the public if you can get specialist doctors in helicopters to people in car accidents who are suffering head trauma. Obviously you save appalling outcomes for them, but as a long-term insurer in the long-tail classes, obviously we save ourselves vast amounts of money if we're not seeing people hospitalised over long periods of time for the trauma that typically arise from head injury. This is an initiative we have on our website. It's been in collaboration with what is now no longer the New South Wales EPA, I should update that, DEC. So our customers can go online and find out information about cars and environmental safety and performance. Again, one of the more productive initiatives we've been engaged in with smash repairers. This is a CD-ROM tool where smash repairers can assess the risks in their own workshops of toxicity, occupational health and safety, a whole range of risks, and as a result see some drop in their premium prices. This is a part of a wonderful partnership that we have operating in Shell Harbour, Redfern and Dubbo. It's a crime prevention partnership. It is truly cross-sector. I have another image of that later. One of the things Gary Johns did in his piece was absolutely attack us for engaging in the issue of climate change, and actually even said this extraordinary thing. He said, there is no empirical relationship has yet been observed between modest temperature changes of a degree or so and the frequency or intensity of such events. Well, I don't think anybody who's at Montreal right now, those thousands of people at the Conference of the Parties, which is going on as we speak, would agree with that. But anyway, moving right along, there is, for us as an insurer, a very, very material relationship to climate change. The tall bar on the left you see represents the 1999 Sydney hailstorm, and represents by considerable magnitude the largest insurance payout that Insurance Australia Group ever made of $180 million. All the rest of them on that chart, with the exception of the Newcastle earthquake, are storm or flood related. There is a direct link to climate change to all of those, and that is why our board and my chief executive have taken a very strong decision to be one of the leading and outspoken voices on climate change in Australia. Again, this represents one of the really interesting partnerships we're involved in. It's a number of leading climate change scientists, but also Tony Coleman, who's our chief actuary. And who would have thought you'd find an actuary in a partnership like this with WWF and very outspoken climate scientists such as Graham Pearman. Just a little bit about climate. I think you all know that we're the worst in terms of per capita emissions of CO2. Interesting to see the marching on of climate change. In the 67 million people a year were affected globally by floods. Now it's 150 million. That absolutely scary statistic about the European summer of 2003, which you probably remember, it was so hot that statistically speaking, and remember I work with lots of actuaries, they love statistics, such a summer only occurs every 46,000 years. And of course, we still don't have final figures, but the estimated insured losses of Hurricane Katrina at around somewhere between 40 to 55 billion and rising, which is far and away the single largest insured losses for any natural disaster. Interesting again, I suppose with my old Greenpeace hat on from many years ago, I remember about a year out when the ozone depletion issue was huge in the late 80s, seeing these sorts of headlines start to occur. And I believe about a year out as we are now, in fact, this coincided with the release of Tim Flannery's recent book on climate change. I think we're moving into a huge tipping point, obviously globally, but also for corporations such as mine. And I believe the smartest ones assessing their carbon risks and making some sense of that, understanding what it means in particular to their investments. So I think businesses that aren't thinking about that, and if you are in CSR in a corporation or indeed government, there's a lot of work to be done in this field, I believe. This is straight from Goldman Sachs, and it's an evaluation of the risks and opportunities of climate risk. This is not a kind of on-the-side analysis for socially responsible investment advice. This is key advice coming out of Goldman Sachs US saying more or less what I just said, that, you know, big business is really crazy if they're not assessing along these lines the carbon risk they face. That's an image of the head injury retrieval trial that I referred to. We've just released our second sustainability report. If you're interested in how we went about that, it's online. We have a very slim, concise version in the interest of saving CO2, but we have a very, very detailed version online at our website with dozens of case studies about how we've gone about things. And hopefully we've tried to be extremely transparent about good news stories and bad news stories, and I can tell you that we failed against our own CO2 targets internally, which I'm have to be transparent about, but I'm usually embarrassed to admit. Although I was at a stakeholder event the other day and a broker for CGU Insurance, one of our commercial arms, came up to me and said quite aggressively, "Did you put out that report?" And I said, yes. And he said, "Well, I just want to say, because you guys have been so honest about failing against your targets, you're going to get our business." So go figure. There's another material relationship to the core business purpose of IAG, not the way anyone would have thought about it though. We've put a lot of emphasis into the occupational health and safety side of things, and often that's a very, very useful entry point for sustainability in CSR and corporations, and that's been one of our success stories. We've had a big drop in incidents of occupational stress and also injury. So, as I said, relating all this to our core business and also relating it to our values. I'm very proud of our values. They're very simple, but they're meritocracy, transparency, honesty, teamwork, and social responsibility. And they're incredibly powerful for someone in my role. I mean, I'm that annoying person in IAG, along with many others now, an increasing number of us. In fact, a whole network of sustainability champions who remind people occasionally, particularly around behaviours of our values. And, they're more than just words to me. They are touchstones for how we behave every single day. That's an image of the cross-sector partnership I mentioned to you. I'm a huge fan of cross-sector partnerships. I think where you have a bunch of people, particularly in a local community, honestly sitting around a table, rolling up their sleeves and working together. Now, that's a fascinating bunch of people. That's the local coppers in Dubbo. The woman in the navy blue dress is the local branch manager from the NRMA branch in Dubbo. There are a couple of wonderful elders, 3 of them there from Dubbo. The man holding the didgeridoo is the CEO of our personal lines, Rick Jackson. He's effectively the CEO of NRMA Insurance. And the conversations, I can tell you, with that group have been absolutely extraordinary in working through a range of problems. Dubbo had extremely high rates of crime, particularly household break and enter. And we've seen this. We believe strongly in the sustainability of these kind of community initiatives. This project's well into its 3rd year, and we would expect it to continue many more years beyond that in terms of our funding. But, of course, what we are seeing is a spectacular decline in those kind of crimes. So we're really very excited about the way that's proceeding. And finally, just a little bit of inspiration. I've kept this quote near my desk for 25 years, so I'm revealing to you all that I'm elderly. But it's actually wrongly attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson. I like it very much, though, and it is another way of coming at the sorts of issues we're on about, reminding us all that financial factors are not everything, and success has a number of different ways of you can think about it, and it goes like this: success. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affectionate children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life is breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynette. And we've got lots of time for questions, so think about them. We're going to get the microphones round. I can see hands going up already. One down here, so we'll just get the microphone across, and if you just introduce yourself, ask Lynette the question.
Lynette, Mike Lotzov from the Australian Compliance Institute, of which IAG is a foundation member.
Oh, I didn't know that. I probably should.
Would it have been possible without Michael?
Ah, very good question. The cult of the leader. I think initially no, although I should say he's supported by a pretty formidable executive as well, who believe in this, and you know, very key amongst that executive is Sam Mostyn, my boss, who's our head of culture and reputation. So in any case, I don't think one CEO banging on his own can ever do this. He's got to have support from his or her immediate leadership team. But the question is, and I think it's one of the questions for us, for those of us who work in this field, as a success factor. So for me, it's about a 3 to 5 year horizon, and that is that whoever it is that replaced Michael Hawker, and unfortunately for us, some bank's going to want to nab him soon because he's so wonderful. That wasn't a play on nab, by the way. Don't misquote me. Is that when the next CEO is hired, will he or she subscribe and support, subscribe personally to very similar values, but also support and continue to drive further the work that has already gone on? And in some ways, if that doesn't happen, if we get a CEO who thinks, oh, well, this is just, that was Mike Hawker's thing, then in fact we will have failed, because it will be a very key touchstone of whether it's been deeply embedded throughout IAG. But I must say there's lots of us engaged, and I'm very proud of the fact that in our employee engagement scores, we ruthlessly survey. It's one of the things about the corporate sector I find extraordinary is how much we survey everything. But we survey our employees twice a year about their engagement with respect to all sorts of things. But two of the highest scoring questions for our employees is the value they ascribe to our emphasis on balancing social, environmental and financial considerations, which is obviously one of my key arguments when I'm making my pitch for my budget. So.
Just down here.
Lynette, hi. I'm Esther Gilmore. I've just recently moved from the Dow Jones Sustainability Index to a corporate sustainability role. Just a question about, firstly, your relationship with your insurers, like the reinsurance.
Yep.
Sets part of your business and what you're doing with them in these areas. And also, will we start to see our insurance premiums changing based on whether or not we live close to a beach and whether or not we're insuring our own homes against global warming, erosion, those sorts of things? And are you going to start building these things into your business model that way?
Two very good questions. I've just forgotten the first part. I'll start with the insurance bit and come back to the other one. Yes, the question of premiums is interesting. There's no doubt as we price risk, there's a very strong likelihood that people living in cyclone belts and so on will see premiums rise. But what we're trying to do alongside that to mitigate some of that is to reward behaviours, with people who potentially over time drive less, who, we'll have a car but we'll drive a lot less option. Or in the case of the cyclone example, are prepared to undertake a range of measures around adaptation of their house. So it might be storm-proofing their house, or thinking about the cladding or those sorts of things. So, but that's right. I mean, insurers have never shied away from the fact that by arguing strongly to national governments and so on that climate change is real, that there are material risks in respect of affordability of insurance because of the rising costs associated with frequent severe weather activity, which causes catastrophes. Now, sorry, what was the first bit again? Yes, the reinsurers have been leading the charge on climate change for some time, Munich Re and Swiss Re in particular. We work really closely with Swiss Re. We're trying to think through some projects that might make sense in terms of our core business, but also potentially some partnerships for funding around wide public education on climate change. Yes. You probably know more about it than me.
So. Sorry, I was just going to support the comment about the reinsurer. I work with Swiss Re. One of the projects we're working with you on is on flood protection insurance, because it's never been affordable or never been able to insure it, but we are now at a place where we believe it can be, and that's one of the key projects they're doing at the moment. So,
great. Thanks for that. There you go. A good example relevant to core business. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay. Our next question up here.
Christopher Wainwright from our community's new corporate social responsibility publication. The question I've got for you is, how have you embedded the sustainability focus into your employment culture, as it really can be hard to embed values into culture, especially when you've got numerous sites, plants, and also different silos?
It is really hard. One of the things that, there's some funny stories about different silos and cultures within IAG. One of the businesses we acquired, which in many ways, at a profound level, CGU, it's our commercial operation, had a more profound understanding of sustainability than other people, in the sense that it's a company that's been around over 100 years. So in their governance practices, for example, are excellent and so on. And yet, over the years, it had developed a very sort of buffy male kind of culture, which I would argue, alongside that, is not really consistent with the sorts of values that we're on about. And I remember having a conversation with someone who's now my new best friend, but he was sort of our head of rural farm insurance, and said, I went to talk to him about sustainability, and I never use the S word with him anymore because it just gets you nowhere fast. But I remember him saying to me, he's about 65, I suppose, and I'm no spring chicken, but I remember he said, that's sustainable, well, he couldn't even say the words, he said, that shit doesn't fly around here, girlie. So, I don't know whether to be flattered or appalled. I'm 44, so, But part of it is about simply the goodwill and the desire of both parties to engage. If you can come to some core understandings that this is about being a better business overall, and how can we assist you to add value, and then if you cannot, one of the things we have to always guard against is to sound like we're on the high moral ground, that we're pains in the arse, that we're terrifying people because we come from this sort of holier than thou mentality, and frankly that was quite difficult baggage for me to get over because of my Greenpeace background. I mean, people just thought I was going to be a mad woman, either abseiling off the building or so holier than thou it wasn't funny. And a lot of the success in the space is about having a sense of humour. If you haven't got a sense of humour, give up now. And the way you engage with people, liking people, just being prepared to have those conversations. And it takes time. It takes a long time.
Lynette, just down here.
Lynette, hi.
Hello.
Hi, Eva Cox. Thank you for saying a whole lot of things that I've been sort of trying, hoping I've only got 10 minutes later, so I wouldn't have much time to say them. But I think that whole issue about embedding it very firmly in your culture and your core business is a really important one. We had sort of some discussions over lunch on that. But this is actually a more difficult question. I can remember somebody saying to me at one stage, after all, government is a form of pooling risk, and so are insurance companies. And it raises for me the issue of how does an insurance company deal with the fact that a lot of the things that you charge for are going to actually leave people out in the cold who can't afford insurance. I mean, on one level, there's insurance, for instance, for community groups to try and manage on those sort of risk-type factors there. On the other, there's a whole lot of people that can't afford it. And how does a company under a sort of corporate sustainability actually take on the fact that it might be a contributor towards forms of inequality?
I knew you'd ask me a tough question, Eva. I expect it. That's right. Absolutely. That's right. The art of working in a corporation is in large part compromise. No, look, there's two things about that. I think the best thinking in the financial... Sorry, Eva, I can't... I'm sort of trying to put my head to the mic and I can't see your face. Just take it that I'm sort of looking your way. I think it's interesting that some of the best thinking in the financial services sector is engaging with notions of microfinance and so on. In our space, it's two things. Microinsurance is a bit of a strange idea. We don't quite know if we can make it work because, apart from anything else, it takes long-term systemic change of communities. You know, even if you like the idea that you can support, let's say, a sole parent, a sole mother, living, you know, in a community with a bank, you can at least say, well, you are a trustworthy person and we'll take the risk on you. And yes, here's your loan. But the notion of risk in a whole community, which might be a disaster in other senses, even though that particular woman is fabulous, is much more complicated. Nevertheless, we're working out what we might do in terms of premiums and partnerships, and I'm talking actively to NCOS about those sorts of issues. The other issue, of course, is underinsurance. And I take the point that for some people, the premium up front they can't afford in the first place, and that, in fact, is your key point. But it's also important to remember that we've got to get people insured, whether it's through government schemes, and I take your point about at what point, you know, private sector stops and starts there. Because in fact it's far more of a social disaster to have people have their entire houses burned down or the entire contents of their home or their livelihoods taken away through a bushfire or whatever. So we've also got to think about underinsurance in that spectrum. And that's probably the more easy win-win. It's great for business, it's great for the community answer. The other thing about reducing our premiums in the long-term interest of society, much harder, but we're looking at how it might make sense.
Just one.
Seems funny asking a question on it, but one of the things that I often ask my friends at dinner parties when they go, oh my God,
you work in insurance? I know I've had to deal with that.
is when they talk about, oh, I'm just about to make a claim on my insurance because my house got broken into, and guess what I'm going to put in for a new camera and a new blah blah. And I say to them, you know, for every dollar you do that, someone else's premium goes up. Yep. And you just sort of pluck the conscience of how many times you've actually heard that and think, if you're trying to talk about sustainability and actually sharing it amongst everybody, the first place we've got to look is, I guess, at ourselves and how we actually...
well, I guess ethics works two ways, you know. Yeah. We want corporations to be ethical and transparent, but it's got to be driven from values at home. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Kipling Zubovich, Corporate Value Associates. I'll try, it's a comment, but I'll try and make it into a question. I know that's always... just on the previous issue of the equity around premiums becoming unaffordable, I guess I'd just like to hear your thoughts on the fact that, in some respects, that unaffordability is a very important price signal.
Yes.
That it explains to people that that's the real cost of what we're doing to the climate, or the cost of oil, or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's right. At one level, that's quite true. But if you've got, meanwhile, immense, you know, other concerns coming from social unrest due to, or just, you know, deprivation in society at large, that's a whole lot of other signals as well. I mean, that's right. I mean, climate change is going to, you know, unless it starts being dealt with, probably going to deliver any number of signals. Some of those will be the more traditional market signals that you refer to, but others will be ones about extreme societal distress.
Just one couple more. Just while we're doing that one, Lynette, my question to you was that when an argument comes at you that what has an insurance company got to do with global warming, do you have a parameter by which you say our charter is, this is our frame of reference and we won't step out of that? Because I do see a lot of companies that do want to say, well, we'll go anywhere. We'll go anywhere that there is a need.
I'm not entirely sure. Do you mean in terms of things I can say publicly about our charter, or?
I'm interested in your charter as a, where does
Right.
corporate social responsibility end for an insurance company like IAG?
Well, I don't know about the insurance company side of things, but where it ends for us is where I can't demonstrate a material relationship to our core purpose. Yeah. And that might disappoint some people. So, for example, we don't have public views on cancer.
Yep.
And even though the cancer charities, along with hundreds of others weekly, will be approaching us as with many corporations for funding, because we see that there's not, unless we were saying health insurance or something. I mean, maybe you could take a very long bow answer.
Yeah.
Anybody who's an academic can probably link everything to everything. But we nevertheless have taken, in fact, our funding parameters, just so I don't get deluged with funding applications next week, just so are around community partnerships and climate change, home and road safety, occupational health and safety, and the one where you can draw the longest bow, and since I spent 4 years in government doing this, I'm now reaping my own karma, I guess, crime prevention, because I think there's lots of things you can say about society that fit with crime prevention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now on the topic of presenting, and I thought what was great about Lynette's presentation is how confident she is and how passionate she is in her topic, and I guess that gives you the confidence to be able to present your argument to a board or a management team or to anybody in the organisation. Now on the topic of presenting and speaking, George Bernard Shaw once said, "I am the most spontaneous speaker in the world because every word, every gesture and every retort has been carefully rehearsed." Now, I read that to my wife this morning, and she kind of looked at me and said, "Oh, okay, I've always thought about a good speech was a bit more like, that dress you like, John." And I said, "I don't understand." She says, "Well, it's long enough to cover the topic, but it's short enough to keep your interest." And then she said to me, "You're not allowed to use that today because that's not politically correct." And so I decided to screw that one out. Okay.